This is Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline, solving the climate crisis while increasing profits in your business. Here's Frank.
Welcome back to my conversation with Heidi Heitkamp, the former U.S. Senator of the great state of North Dakota. We've been discussing her work with the Bipartisan Policy Center's Farm and Forest Carbon Solutions Task Force. Now, Senator, in part one, you mentioned forest fires. It seems like there's a wildfire continuously raging out west. We know there are long-term net benefits to the natural environment from new growth and new habitat from forest fires. But how is it seen from a carbon emissions perspective? Does the carbon sink of new growth offset emissions from a fire?
Not yet, it doesn't. And
Not
that's
yet.
why we have a very robust replanting, reforestation. How do we do this? Because as we know, you cut down, that tree stores carbon. You cut down a tree, you make furniture out of it, you use it for building materials. It's with us for a long time. That carbon's stored for a long time.
Yes.
And so, forest fires are very, very bad for the environment. Yeah, I remember when Yellowstone had their large fire, and there was a big controversy about whether the Forest Service should let it burn or whether they should try and contain the forest fire. And one of the things they said is forest fires are natural outpourings of weather-related, usually lightning-related incidences, and they usually promote better habitat, long-term killing pests that might cause disease if the growth is too old. And so there is a lot of, I am not, as you know, in North Dakota, I am not a forestry expert. There has always been a joke in North Dakota that our state tree is a telephone pole.
That's funny.
So I'm not professing to be a forestry expert, but I do know that there are a lot of amazing people who are working, and a lot of controversy. I mean, I've been on
tremendous amount.
Streams about what this happens, but reforestation has to be part of our climate plan.
Right. You often talk about many rural Americans seeing the effects of climate change, but many of those Americans live in red states where clean energy and climate change are not top priorities for their lawmakers. How do we rectify that?
I think one of the things that is changing is how people are looking at it. I used to tell my folks, maybe too late with the coal industry, when they would come in and talk to me, I said, look, I did a lot of years working, understanding the industry, understanding generation, why it was that we were using coal. I said, if you want my vote, you can have my vote. If you want my leadership, you can't be hell no.
Mm-hmm.
And when I preach climate, I say, look, you all might say, no, but the reality of the marketplace, I said, no one on Wall Street's going to give you money to build a coal-fired power plant. They just see that as stranded investment. No one, I think natural gas and natural gas infrastructure, unfortunately, is facing the same challenges that coal has faced. But my point is, this climate issue is not going away. There's more and more adapters to understanding that something needs to be done. I said, even if you don't believe something needs to be done, the political reality is that it will be done to you and not with you. So come to the table. Come and talk about what you're going to do. I think it's, to me, it's fascinating, and maybe this is a bit sour grapes, but, I led the charge for carbon sequestration expansion of credits under 45Q. I did a lot of work on carbon sequestration. I had a dickens of a time getting other people in my own delegation to engage with me and be involved. Only begrudgingly, when they saw that was going to happen, did they jump on the bandwagon. Now they're the biggest cheerleaders.
Really?
Right? Now they invented carbon capture.
Exactly.
But my point is that it's happening slowly but surely. I knew that things had actually changed when I saw that Minority Leader McCarthy in the House had actually led an effort to come up with a climate plan for House Republicans, recognizing that it may not be the most serious voting issue in the current, majority of the American populace. But guess what? When you look at young people, this is a huge, if you want to attract young people to your party, you can't be hell no politically. And, we're going to get through this thing with Russia. We're going to get through these things with their energy crisis. But at the end of the day, the climate debate and maybe the need to do something on climate is going to become a majority issue in this country. And, there's an old saying in Texas, you better get to the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing this change happen actually right in front of us, with a lot of major corporations making goals to be, 100% renewable energy, carbon neutral. And I'm thinking it may be a result of a lot of these corporations being involved in Europe, having to fall under the Kyoto Protocol and cap and change. And it's coming to the United States, and they're actually seeing, as far as it improves their corporate image, right? And I think that's a powerful force, actually.
Yeah, I think that there is a whole movement within corporate governance. Is our only fiduciary obligation the bottom line? And so Let's start there. And that's always been the safe harbor for corporations, right? As long as they're protecting the bottom line, they are in fact immune from criticism by shareholders. Now we're seeing a movement, and I was just on a national television show where two climate deniers were bemoaning the fact that corporate America, and certainly the people who finance on Wall Street, were sensitive to climate issues. And they were just wringing their hands saying, how dare they limit their investments? And I thought, number one, you're supposed to be pro-free enterprise. No one has told these corporations to do this. There's not an SEC regulation saying you have to be sensitive on climate. But that's what their shareholders are demanding. And that's what they've decided is part of their corporate governance, to have a responsibility for climate. And I think that it is driven somewhat by multinationals, but I think it's also being driven by an expanding sense of what is their obligation as fiduciaries in corporate governance. And you can argue about whether that's a good trend or a bad trend. I happen to think it's a good trend when they care about diversity, when they care about social justice issues, when they care about climate and environmental issues. I think that's a good thing. If corporations are going to be people in America, then we should hold them accountable for building a better America.
Yeah, what I see that's happening also is, especially with public companies. So with public companies in your reports, you have to identify risk, right? And then how that may impact your business. Not that it is, but it may in the future. And through, observation today, we are seeing the impact of climate change, increasing ocean temperatures, sea level rise as a result of that. All kinds of weather patterns, fires, all of these things are signs of climate change. And then corporate America has to address that risk in their filings and how that may. So it really is, it is an SEC requirement to address those risks. So it's almost indirectly an SEC regulation because they have to address this. And you're seeing even activist shareholders forcing these companies to identify what these risks are and make changes.
When you look at corporations now who are looking at ESG and making sure that their ratings and their rankings are good, when more and more shareholders want to be investing in mutual funds that go beyond profitability and look at companies that are concerned about social issues, are concerned about environmental issues, are concerned that governance within that corporation reflects those interests. There's a monetary interest, as you expressed, with risk, but also with making yourself more attractive to the investor of the future.
Correct.
And the right wing can bemoan that, but this is coming from corporate governance circles. And when you look at the Business Roundtable, which is the big of the big, they have really moved into a broader and longer discussion about these issues.
Part of it actually is from this next generation actually believing in climate change. I absolutely believe in climate change. I have no issue, when it comes to, when I speak addressing audiences, I have no issue with this next generation. They're knowledgeable about climate change. They know it exists. It's really our boomer, unfortunately, our boomer generation who are the deniers. And that's the way I'm seeing it.
Although I would say that when you get to the baseline of, yes, something needs to be done, I spent, a good portion of my time since the Senate on college campuses, on various college campuses. Most of the young people that I encountered were very curious about how do we get from point A to point B, but I would get the occasional person saying, well, we'll just move to renewables. And I would look at him and say, well, when do you think that can be done? So there's this world of magical thinking that things can change tomorrow, which is not realistic.
I remember when I was idealistic also when I was younger. And then you become a little bit wiser as you get older and realize, well, it really doesn't work that way, right?
Well, they'll just understand, and I would challenge them, read. There's plenty of information out there talking about this transition and how difficult it's going to be, how difficult it's going to be internationally to shut down a coal-fired power plant in an African community where that's their only source of electricity, and they can't afford solar panels. Number one, come from knowledge. Have a passion, have an absolute belief that things can change. I get it, but understand the facts, understand where we are right now, not just in this country, but globally in achieving these climate goals.
Right. We'll change the subject a little bit. In the task force that you're working on and what you're doing with reducing the carbon in agriculture, I'm just curious, what role does the Department of Agriculture play in all of this, and what can they do better?
Well, they are really moving in that direction under the leadership of Vilsack at the direction of the Biden administration. We were very blessed to have Secretary Vilsack at the rollout of this report. He said it fits very well with the work that they're doing on climate, the work, the direction that they're headed. And we expect that there will be, as we look at the next farm bill, there will be climate provisions in the next farm bill that will create an economic opportunity for ranchers and farmers, but also set out some goals for how this industry, how agriculture and forestry can be part of the climate solution. And so they're all on board, moving in the right direction. They're obviously in the stage of figuring out what's the best bang for the buck. They're doing a lot of calling for a lot of test projects, which I think is smart. Find out, let the marketplace innovate, and then take those best innovations and put them in public policy. So I have nothing but praise for what the Department of Agriculture is doing in this space.
That's great to hear. So how can we develop actionable policy recommendations for scaling up public and private investments in carbon storage and emission reductions on our agricultural lands?
Well, I think you have to make it, you have to make sure that there's something in it for the people who own the land. I mean, you're asking them to change practice. A lot of early adapters are out there saying, look, we've been at this a long time. Don't leave us behind. And I'm always sympathetic to early adapters, people who have done the right thing. Then we create an incentive for people who have resisted for a long period of time. And the early adapters get left behind, even though they've been doing everything right to begin with. And so what I would say is you have got to, number one, get the technical expertise out there so people understand how they can continue to farm and produce, but also have the benefit of sequestering carbon and the benefit potentially of selling that use of their land and making it an income stream. So to me, the barrier right now is, number one, what's the biggest bang for the buck? How can we guarantee certainty in terms of carbon actually being sequestered in these farming practices? And then how can we help ranchers and farmers basically see the economic advantage that they would have, whether it's less need for irrigation. Think about, I always tell this story, and it's about a drought that happened in western North Dakota. I had a rancher in Mercer County who had been doing EQIP, which is a grazing program with reimbursement for equipment that you would have to buy to rotating their grazing. And the drought happened. All of his other neighbors were buying feed, buying hay. And he wasn't buying hay because he still had a grass crop. Guess what? All of a sudden, everybody's looking across the fence going, how come you still have grass? That the more we get out there, the more we demonstrate these practices work, the more you're going to get people to adopt these practices.
That's great. It's actually a great illustration how grass is greener on the other side is a good thing.
Yep.
So, historically, you've been a supporter of domestic energy development, both in fossil fuels and renewable resources. On a personal note, how did you become interested in renewable resources?
Because I truly believe that all of the above is the right strategy, and that we need to be what I would say fuel agnostic, right? We need to be fuel agnostic,
right,
but emission sensitive. You know, I saw over the years, whether it was meeting mercury standards or NOx and SOx, that when you left the challenge out there, people could achieve some pretty amazing things. And so I also believe, as somebody who is always worried about working people, that one of the things that we can't do is drive energy prices so high that it really straps working families. And so I've never been a believer that we have to forego low-cost energy for climate goals. I think we can do both. I think America can do both. I still believe all of the above is the right solution to our energy. Recognizing that all of the above doesn't mean that we are emissions. We're going to let people admit whatever they want to admit. We set out a goal and say, meet this goal, and that's going to achieve our national policy.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I love your approach. It's a practical approach. You know, it's very similar approach that we have being a builder. Growing up in a farming community helped you realize and become more practical in your approach, which I think is great. And that's why, you know, you can reach across the aisle, and that's why, you know, you can have this bipartisan approach, because when you're addressing it from a practical standpoint, other people, you know, will take notice. And I think that's great. I think that's super.
Well, I hope so. I mean, we need one thing, and that's common sense on both sides. And
exactly,
we're a little short of that these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this was incredibly helpful. I learned a lot. Most of my work is done with industry, manufacturing. And, you know, I was really curious to find out a lot of these things that you talked about, and it was great.
And thank you for what you're doing. I mean, I think that when you look at innovation in building and building materials, that is such a critical part of achieving climate goals. And so you keep at it. It would be interesting to figure out how many tons of CO2 you've actually prevented from going into the atmosphere by the work that you do. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. She is Heidi Heitkamp, the former U.S. Senator from North Dakota. And that's it for the first episode of Decarbonizing the World. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you'll automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left me a review so more folks like yourself can discover the show. Until next time, take care.
This has been Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline. To connect with Frank and to learn more about clean energy, reducing fossil fuels, and increasing profits, go to frankdeline.com. Decarbonize the World is a production of Advantage Audio.